Hey guys, I just want to show you a real life example of psychological warfare that has been targeted specifically against East Asians, but of course the same methods are being used against us as well. So, glowies turned our celebrities into sissy pants, says Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Beijing has accused the glowies of secretly fueling the trend for effeminate or sissy celebrities in China. Again, this is a theme that I see dominating our media. Presently, you got people like Tom Holland, you got Timothy Chalamet, all these twink type people who are being pushed as symbols of masculinity. Whereas before, it was people like Sean Connery. The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, one of the country's leading research institutions, studied China's booming entertainment industry and its demand for androgynous, coiffed male celebrities. Derided in state media as Zhao Zhan Rao, I don't know if I said that right, which means little fresh meat. It's just disturbing. A CAST report accuses the glowies of beginning its campaign to brainwash Asian men in Japan in 1962 with the foundation of the Johnny and Associates talent agency. Now, this Johnny and Associates talent agency has a very, very disturbing history. And it goes back all the way to this guy, Johnny Kitagawa, who was a Japanese man born in the States. But his family goes to Japan later on, and they work for the American Embassy in Japan. So they are glowies, essentially. They got glowed up. And this guy, Johnny, starts a talent agency in Japan, Johnny and Associates Incorporated. Sorry, 1962. So we see this as the year when they start to push effeminate archetypes on men. We'll get into that later, but this is where you have all the MK Ultra boomer music coming out. But this was coordinated not just in the West, but this is a coordinated effort as well to attack the Japanese psyche. And we see the effects of that in Japan, of course. Their birth rate is plummeting. You have this phenomena of herbivore men, hikikomori types. They seem to be just content with a life in front of the screen. They've lost their vigor and their vitality. Now, this talent agency follows the typical MO of celebrity, where they abuse and molest people underage. Very horrible things that they do, but they do it for a reason. Basically, they know that they can control their agents through this means, because if you know anything about trauma, especially in childhood, this creates a form of a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis that's becoming more and more well known, and it's called borderline personality disorder. And some of the key factors and ailments of borderline is this dynamic between splitting, which causes the person to idealize and demonize people. So these split people, they often have somebody that has been clinically referred to as the FP, which is the favorite person. And that's the person who really dominates their psyche. And this is how they control their agents and all these child celebrities that they groom up into being media agents, is that they are split. They have the FP. The FP is the handler, and they have a dynamic of idealizing and demonizing this handler. And by this, they can use and control these people. Now, this agency used the same MO as they do here to create these agents. And we can see they have a very similar aesthetic to the same ops that were used against us. Right? Do these gentlemen remind you of anybody? Same look, same hair, same style, same MO, same means to the end to change the psyche of the masses, to turn the samurai, which dominated the archetype of Japanese people for hundreds of years, into what we see today, which is, this is actually very mild compared to what we see today in Japan, sadly enough. I have a lot of respect for the Japanese, for the Koreans, and unfortunately, you want to talk about people being replaced, well, they are going to vanish faster than any other race on Earth, sadly. So you want to talk about replacement? Well, look at them. Okay, it's the exact same model because the Glowies figured out the best way to do this, obviously. It's just a template to change the minds of people. And of course, this happened openly against the Japanese. And then that you're trying to do it against the Chinese. I wonder what other post-war group of people they really targeted as well. Claims of the founder, Johnny Kitagawa, was loyal to the Americans rather than the Japanese, and colluded with the Glowies to use entertainment to brainwash the Japanese people, to weaken the male temperament of the Japanese society. Of course, this is exactly what's happened. There's no question about this. There is no debate. Since then, the Chinese report titled, "Do You Know How Hard the Glowy is Working?" says weekend male temperament has spread to other parts of East Asia. Yes, there's a whole subculture online about Asian masculinity and the Asian masculinity crisis, and this was not actually a phenomenon until the post-war society. It's being used against them to, of course, emasculate them. Beijing's experts compare China's entertainment industry, which advocates feminine male artists, to Hollywood. Exactly. And you'll have guys from time to time from Chris Hemsworth, but they are portrayed as bubbling fools. They are never portrayed as capable, right? Chris Pratt and Thor, wannabe Thor, they are used as bumbling fools, and they're usually led about by the twinks and the women to the actual end goal. They're just like battering rams that are being used by other people, essentially. Male stars are not like this. Most of them are tough guys in Hollywood. Yeah, well, I think that was misrepresented. I think there's a mistake here because I see this everywhere, especially in the music industry. The biggest celebrities in mainland China often are imported from K-pop industry in South Korea. Their style has influenced a generation of young fans in China who would like their idols to be pale and delicate. Yeah, this pale skin thing, I don't, it's anti vigor. You don't want to be in the sun. It's not about sun and steel, like Mishima, who was turning himself dark because he wanted to become as strong as possible, and he realized that sunlight was essential to building the physique that he wanted. So he had a philosophy of sun and steel, and now sun and steel has been replaced by pale and delicate. This is irked Beijing, which connects national strength with male masculinity. An editorial in the state-run Zhenhao news agency derided Zhao Zianrao as sissy boys unfit for the task of helping our nation reach its renaissance. This is why I don't think everything on planet Earth is controlled. If I'm on the spectrum of what's fake and what's real, I'm not all the way to everything being completely faked. If the Chinese wanted to weaken their own people, they would not resist this. They would not release this report. I am no fan of the CCP, but I think in this instance, they have proven to at least have some sort of counterintelligence to the problem. Last year's in How, the state news agency lambasted singers and a new group, New F4, as sissy pants, and said they were not men, but women. They look androgynous and wear makeup. They are slender and weak. The influential opinion columnist using the pen name Zhen Shengping wrote, "The impact this sick culture will have on our young generation is immeasurable." To counter the populator of Zhao Zhenrao, the government has backed films such as Wolf Warrior 2 with male leads who are macho and militaristic. Anyone who offends China will be killed no matter what and how far the target is. The tagline for the film, which features guns, explosions, tanks, and tanks, reads, "While China is still a highly patriarchal society, notions of gender and sexuality have become more diverse, especially since homosexuality was declassified as a mental illness in 2001. Well, China has a lot of problems. Their one-child policy was an utter disaster, and they're paying a hefty price for that policy, which I think it's just disgusting to have a one-child policy. It's insane. So yeah, obviously there's some strange ops going on in China as well, but the fact that they can point this out shows me that there's some sort of, there are factional wars. If you ever find a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Davids, I believe his name was, he was a Canadian researcher, and essentially this man claimed to be a member of the Eastern Illuminati, and that there was an underground war between the two factions, the Western and Eastern Illuminati. And he actually had an interview with David Rockefeller, which was very interesting. He had a lot of access to people. I think he's still around. Lots of interesting takes for sure, but I do tend to think things are more factional than we would like to believe. Of course, otherwise things would be moving faster at a much greater pace. So this all ties into the hippie movement, the MK Ultra movement of the 60s. We have figures like Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison's father was the head of the Navy, or an admiral at least, very high-ranking individual. And Morrison was somebody who was obviously a split borderline. He had very intense tendencies of addiction, of idealizing people. I believe Pam was his handler. It was pretty clear that she was a handler all along. He may have been murdered. He may have suicided. He may have overdosed. No one really knows. But his music, very circus carnivore like aesthetic to it. I believe his role was to cause as much chaos in the psyche of the boomers and silent gen as possible. He definitely was some sort of agent, either consciously or unconsciously. The thing what people don't understand is that a lot of people are unconscious agents, and even people within the truth sphere are unconscious agents without even knowing it because they've been trauma programmed from birth to split, to idealize, to demonize certain things. And he has all the classic traits. The impulsive behavior is another massive symptom of this borderline personality. And all these rock stars and vast majority of celebrities have these impulsive tendencies because you see it over and over again. Drug overdose, drug abuse, large numbers of sexual partners, which is kind of the ethos that they promote. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, that is essentially the borderline life, is sex, drugs, rock and roll. Rock and roll, obviously, is the tumultuous lifestyle, the constant ups and downs that they live. It's not bipolar because bipolar has manic episodes that last for days. Borderlines will go up and down within the day. Yeah, you also see Jimi Hendrix. These are all members of the 27 Club. Jimi Hendrix as well. Hendrix died at 27. He was in the military. After the military, he became prominent in the music industry. He was part of the so-called British invasion, even though he was American. I forgot to mention with Morrison, his producer was actually a Rothschild. And the Rothschild, obviously, the Rothschild found Morrison, and he knew that this guy was perfect for what they needed to do with the dismantling of the old American and Western mind and replacing it with the counterculture, with the social revolutions of the 1960s, which was like the catalyst for a lot of the problems we see today. Now, where's Mr. Rothschild? Paul Rothschild, right? Upper class Rothschild man, studying opera. Of course, like they keep the upper class high art for themselves, and then they disseminate the low art to the masses to turn them from this into this, which is the MO, which was the plan. So discord, so chaos, make us more easily controlled. If we're all idolizing borderlines, we tend to become borderline. And I think a lot of you might be able to sadly might be able to relate to the borderline tendencies because in order to see a lot of this stuff, you need to have either been a candidate some point in your life or have gone through some either conscious or unconscious trauma programming, which increases your, that is another aspect that increases your perception, your social perception, You can read people very well. You can read things subconsciously very well because you need to be able to find things that are out there to get you. And the biggest influencer of producing borderline is emotional neglect as a child, which all these people were, of course, Kurt Cobain. Massive borderline tendencies, addiction problems, tumultuous relationships. That's another thing. Can't keep relationships steady, can't keep jobs steady. He couldn't keep a job. He was like a janitor until he started Nirvana. And constantly up and down, addicted to heroin. Suicide, again, another aspect of the borderline. Massive amounts of suicidal ideation. Constant. It's completely saturated within his music, within his themes, that he was suicidal. I don't think it really matters if he was murdered or if it was a suicide, because the outcome was the same. Essentially, he was probably programmed to kill himself, I think, actually. I don't think it was a murder. I think it was a subconscious programming that he underwent. There's a lot of indications that he had abuse as a child, and so he was split very young. And you can see his relationship with Courtney, who was his handler. Courtney was somebody who he idolized and demonized simultaneously. She was clearly his FP, his favorite person. And of course, he talks about how wonderful intercourse was with her, which is another aspect of this borderline thing, is that the sexuality is hyper intense. Yeah, so I think every single one of the 27 club was split. Joplin too, same thing. Massive amounts of borderline tendencies, massive amounts of splitting, drug addiction. Apparently, she was extremely sexually active with tons and tons of people. Just the exact same pattern. And that's why they promote sex, drugs, rock and roll. Because that's how you create borderlines. That's what the borderline idealizes their life. They are very in the moment. Because the only thing that really ends the empty feelings inside, which is another aspect, is this feelings of constant emptiness, is the distractions of fleeting pleasures in life. So I would, you guys, we have to be really, really careful about the media we consume. We have to avoid this boomer MK Ultra music. And guys, they still play it on the radio constantly. It's constantly on the radio. These songs are 60 years old. Okay? And when I turn on the radio, what do I hear? I hear the Beatles, I hear the Doors, I hear Jimi Hendrix, I hear all these bands from 60 freaking years ago. I mean, I don't live in a super urban area, so I don't have a lot of access to like the newer stations, the hipper stations, but in these rural areas, it's just boomer tunes all day long. Boomer tunes, boomer tunes, boomer tunes. And they're playing it for a reason. Guys, why do you think the boomers never grew up? Why do you think they're still thinking that they're 18 years old? They're still partying. They're still going on trips. They're still going on these excursions, and they still want to be like attractive. Okay, like I'm in my 30s and I don't think as myself as attractive or want to be attractive anymore. I think it's kind of cringe and it's kind of gross for people who are middle age trying to laud themselves as still being young and hot. Okay, I had my time in the sun. It's over, and but the boomers could never let this go, and that's because of their sex, drugs, rock and roll conditioning. And if you're a millennial, the boomers instilled this into you, which is why a lot of us kind of had a second 60s renaissance in the 2000s, where we try to emulate this behavior, sadly. And luckily for us, we have, I mean, the lack of the boomer economy kind of has psychological benefits where you can analyze your own life and the forces that influenced you and recognize that this is not an optimal ontology to operate under. So there's a lot of self-reflection within millennials compared to boomers. If I look at my analytics for this channel, it's about 80% millennial, 10% Gen X, 10% Gen Z, and 0% boomer. Boomers are not interested in this type of content because this completely slaps them in the face and mocks and denigrates all the things that they hold dear, which is sex, drugs, rock and roll. Whoever has the most toys at the end wins, right? This whole boomer ethos. But, the boomers were programmed to think like this. They were instilled as the first real consumer generation because they're war baby parents, their war silent gen, greatest gen parents actually had disposable income for the first time in the economy. So this whole thing, they were turned into the me generation. And it's been proven to me countless times that this tendency to relate everything back to them in some shape, form, or manner will never be broken at this point in their lives. They're in their golden years at this point, so that's not going away. And that's because of this MK Ultra, sex, drugs, and rock and roll conditioning. But for us, I think there's still hope. We're here. We're thinking about these things. We're researching these things. We understand the programming. We are awakening. Things are not improving on the material aspect of our world, but I think psychologically and the individual and collectively, there is sort of a renaissance happening. And be it small, but it's at least something that I'm very proud and excited to witness and be a part of. But again, they turned the samurai into a herbivore, and they turned the Viking into a soy boy. So that's another thing I want to touch on, is that it's not just about the West. East Asia has been basically the testing ground, and they're farther ahead than us. Their birth rate will plummet under 1 within the next 20 years, and I don't think things will change. I don't see a drastic pushback against this kind of thing over there. Again, every continent on the world except for one has a below replacement birth rate at this point. And they don't, it's cross-cultural. They don't want any culture to have a warrior, noble, heroic ethos anymore. They want us all to be soy jack, Funko Pop consumers. And this goes for every race on Earth, including black people. Black people are now being psyoped with things like Lil Nas and the like. So it's happening to all of us. It's just that Japanese and Korean people are, of course, the farthest along, followed by Germanic white people, and then everybody else is now getting their fair. If you look at the Visegrad countries, they are rapidly becoming part of this ethos as well. The Giga-Slav archetype is now also being replaced by the Soy Slav. It's happening everywhere, and we just have to recognize it. Of course, they probably have more of a chance to rebound from it because they're later in the game, but this is not just a Western situation. It's everywhere, and of course, there's cultures that have never actually had this ethos. They've always been kind of these longhouse people, and these are the cultures that are being promoted everywhere in the world. It's not just, they're not being imported just to the West. These cultures, these longhouse cultures, are being imported everywhere in the world to essentially spread their longhouse mentality because they're safe. They're safe consumers. They will buy these insanely overpriced consumer products. They will collect sneakers. They will collect luxury, pointless items, even though they're not even middle class. They are the perfect drones for the mass man. And they'll probably are trying to alchemically transform us into this mass culture. So just be aware of that. I really like to thank everybody who subscribed to my last video about shillelaghs. Of course, my channel is quite broad in its topics because I'm not very... I don't like being tied down to certain niches. I don't really care about gaming algorithms or things like that. I just try to speak from my experience and try to share what I've learned with others and learn from others as well, because I've learned so much since I've started this channel from all you guys, and I just thank you all, and thanks for listening, and then I'll see you next time.